When people think about organized crime, they often picture someone making a choice at some point in their life. Maybe they fall in with the wrong crowd. They get involved in a robbery, maybe. They start working for a local mobster and gradually move deeper into that underworld. Or for Benedetto, Benny, Aloi, things, they were different. By the time he was old enough to understand the world around him, organized crime was already a part of everyday life. Benedetto Aloi was born October 6, 1935 in Brooklyn. He came into the world during the time when New York's mafia families were still growing in power and influence.
Yeah, still trying to find their way, huh?
The city was packed with immigrant neighborhoods, and in many of those communities, the old mafia wasn't some distant criminal organization people only read about in the newspapers. Nope. These guys were local. People knew who they were. They were around the neighborhood walking around. They owned all the businesses. They ran the gambling operations. They settled disputes on their own. And they exercised influence throughout entire neighborhoods. The Aloi family was deeply connected to that world. Oh, Benny's daddy, he was Sebastian Aloi. They call him Buster. He's a respected member of the Profaci family, the organization that would later become, obviously, the Colombos. Buster had built a reputation through gambling and other rackets, and he was well known inside the family's ranks. He wasn't just connected to organized crime either. Organized crime was his profession. He was a professional mobster.
Oh, okay.
That meant Benny, he grew up around people who lived that life every single day. Family gatherings, neighborhood relationships, business associates, they often overlapped with mob connections. The men who visited the house, they weren't bankers, lawyers, or politicians, all of worse people.
Right.
Many were involved in gambling, loan sharking, and other illegal operations tied to the Profaci family. Benny, he wasn't the only member of the family headed down that path either. His older brother, Vincenzo Vinny Aloi, he would eventually become one of the most powerful figures in that family. In the years ahead, the Aloi name would become well known inside organized crime circles. Both brothers, they would spend decades climbing through the ranks of the same organization their very father served.
Look at that. Beautiful. As old Benny grew up in Brooklyn, surrounded by a culture that placed enormous value on loyalty, family ties, and reputation. Those ideas, they weren't unique to the mafia, but within organized crime, they carried even greater importance. A man's word, it mattered. It pretty much mattered. It's the only thing that mattered. Family connections mattered. Knowing the right people mattered. For a young Benny, those lessons, they were everywhere. Exactly. When he first became involved in organized crime, it's unclear. Like many future mobsters, there isn't a detailed public record showing the moment that he stepped into that world. Like he filled out a fucking application or something. What is clear is that he did grow up closer to organized crime than most people. He didn't need an introduction to the mafia. It was already there. He was born into the family that was already part of it. And as years passed, old Benny, he would follow the same path his daddy took up before him. By the time old Benny reached adulthood, there was probably very little mystery left about how organized crime worked. He spent his entire life around men involved in the Profaci crime family. He watched how money was made. Really? Actually made?
Probably.
How favors were exchanged and how loyalty was rewarded. And how problems, how they were handled. While most young men were figuring out what kind of career they wanted.
He already had one.
Oh, Benny, he already had a pretty good idea of the world he was stepping into. Like many future mob figures, he didn't start at the top. The old mafia, Los Cosa Nostra, it wasn't a place where somebody was handed power overnight, unless you took it. Even the sons of the respected members had to prove that they could earn money, keep their mouth fucking shut, and follow instructions without any talk back. Family connections could open doors, but they couldn't guarantee respect. We'll open the door for you, bud, but it's up to you to walk in and close it.
Right.
During the 50s and early 60s, Benny gradually became involved in the family's ops.
And both.
Right.
Both kind of ops.
Right. Public records from this period, limited, which isn't unusual when it comes to lower level mob activity. People running these rackets weren't exactly advertising what the hell they were doing. What we do know, though, is that Benny became involved in the kinds of operations that formed the backbone of organized crime in New York City. One of those rackets, policy gambling, commonly known as the numbers game.
Numbers racket.
Look at that. Like it.
Long before state lotteries became legal, thousands of people placed small daily bets through illegal bookmakers. A person might wager a few cents or a dollar on a set of numbers and hope they came up as the winning combination.
Nice.
Sounded pretty simple, but when enough people were playing every day, the money, that adds up fast. For organized crime families, policy gambling was steady income.
But I just hope the numbers ever pop up for anybody, though.
Right. The risk was relatively low compared to robbery or other violent crimes, and the profits could be enormous. Collectors, they gathered the bets, supervisors kept track of the money, and the higher-ranking members took the share off the top. Benny also became involved in loan sharking, because who didn't?
Right.
It was another classic mafia racket. People who couldn't get money from a bank, they would borrow money from the mob leaders instead.
Happened a lot.
The catch was the interest rates. Miss a payment and the amount it could grow that you owe quickly. Refuse to pay altogether, and the borrower might find himself dealing with a little unpleasant consequences.
Mm-hmm.
The real business wasn't lending money, though. The real business was collecting it.
Right.
Men who developed a reputation for reliability and toughness often found themselves trusted with larger responsibilities. They had to keep money flowing upward while making sure debtors understood the importance of paying on time. For old Benny, these operations became both a source of income and a training ground. He was learning how the family made money. He was learning who could be trusted. He was also learning how decisions were made. Most importantly, though, he was building a reputation.
Hey.
The mafia, they ran on relationships and reputation. A man who consistently earned money and handled business properly, they became valuable assets. People noticed, the word traveled around, and opportunities opened up for him. Over time, old Benny became known as someone who could be counted on to do exactly what was expected. Give it to Benny, he'll do it.
Yeah.
Might not sound like much, but inside organized crime, reliability was often worth more than flashiness. And as Benny continued proving himself, the family began trusting him with more responsibility, setting the stage for his rise inside what would soon become known as the Colombo crime family.
Look at that. Well, that crime family. Well, while Benny, he was learning the business, the organization around him was going through one of the most turbulent times in history. The crime family his father, what? The crime family his father belonged to wasn't called the Colombo. No, it was Profaci. Joseph Profaci was the boss. And for years, Profaci had built one of New York's 5 families into a powerful organization. He controlled gambling, loan sharking, what? He controlled gambling operations, loan sharking rackets, labor interests, and a wide network of members and associates spread throughout the city. On the surface, the family looked stable.
Oh, but it wasn't.
But behind the scenes, trouble had been brewing. Many members believed that Profaci demanded too much. He demanded too much money from his captains and from his soldiers. Complaints about tribute payments, favoritism, and leadership decisions became increasingly common. This happened every time somebody talked. Some members felt they were doing the work while Profaci just collected a larger and larger share of the profits while doing nothing.
Well, they didn't just feel that, because that's exactly what was happening.
Those frustrations eventually exploded into an open conflict. In 1960, a group of family members led by brothers Joe and Larry Gallo launched a rebellion against Profaci leadership. The dispute, well, triggered kidnappings, shootings, and years of eternal warfare. This became known as the First Colombo War. For younger members and associates connected to the family, it was dangerous. This was a dangerous time. The people involved, they weren't fighting rival gangs or competing crime families. They were fighting each other. It's like the Civil War. Men who had worked together for years suddenly found themselves on opposite sides. Longtime friendships disappeared. Alliances shifted. Nobody could be completely sure who'd still be standing when the conflict finally ended. But the Aloi family, they managed to survive the chaos. Sebastian Aloi, they call him Buster, remained loyal to Profaci. And as the fighting continued, Benny and his brother Vinny, they stayed connected to the faction that ultimately retained control of the organization. They picked the right side. Good for them. The war, well, never completely solved the family's problems. But events took another turn. 1962, when Joseph Profaci died from cancer. His death created a leadership vacuum. For a short period, Joseph Malioco, he took control of the family. That arrangement didn't last long, though. After becoming involved in a failed plot against rival mafia leaders, Malioco was forced out, and leadership passed to Joseph Colombo.
Who was the very guy that went and told the plan that Malioco was about to do.
And guess what? And under Colombo, the family entered a new era and name.
The organization became known as the Colombo crime family, the name it still carries to this day. Colombo, he was younger, he was energetic, and far more public than any mafia bosses of his generation. He frequently appeared in the media and even founded the old Italian-American Civil Rights League, which is an organization he claimed was fighting discrimination against Italian-Americans.
Damn right.
Whether people believe Colombo's public image or not, his rise marked a major turning point for the family. And for Benny, the transition was important for another reason. See, he had entered organized crime under the old Profaci organization. Now he finds himself building a career inside a newly named family. He's trying to move beyond years of internal conflict and leadership struggles. The violence of the Gallo Rebellion had shown how quickly power could change in a minute. Loyalty wasn't enough. Families could split apart, bosses could fall, alliances could shift literally overnight. These are all lessons Benny would carry with him for the rest of his career.
Damn right.
In the years ahead, the Colombo family stabilized and expanded its operations.
Hell yeah.
Benny, he would begin moving higher within the ranks. By the late 60s into the early 70s, the Aloi family had become one of the more recognizable names inside the family. A big part of that was because both Benny and Vinny, they were steadily moving upward at the same time.
Hell yeah.
Unlike some mob families that saw brothers or relatives competing against each other, the brothers, they over here, the brother Alois, they had generally advanced together.
Why not?
Their father's rep had opened doors, but by this point, both men had spent years proving they could earn money and handle responsibility on their own. Of the two, Vinny, he became the more publicly visible one. As the family went through another period of instability in the early 70s, Vinny emerged as one of the family's most influential leaders.
Nice.
After Colombo boss Joseph Colombo was shot, permanently disabled in 71, the family entered just another uncertain period. Leadership questions once again became a major issue, and several powerful figures, they all stepped forward to help keep the organization running. Vinny, he became one of those guys. For a time, he served as the acting boss, helping oversee family operations while the organization tried to maintain stability during yet another leadership crisis. For Benny, though, having a brother in such a powerful position certainly didn't hurt him. But being related to an influential mob leader only went so far. The Mafia was full of sons, nephews, cousins, and brothers of important men who never rose very far. Respect inside the family still depended heavily on one thing and one thing only. You got to earn that cheddar, baby.
And by this point, Benny had built a reputation as a dependable operator involved in gambling and loan sharking that generated steady income. He wasn't known as a flashy public figure. He wasn't known for seeking attention. But instead, he developed a reputation for quietly handling business and producing results. And those qualities mattered. Crime families depended on men who could keep money flowing without attracting unnecessary attention from laws. The loudest people in organized crime often ended up dead, arrested, or both. Dead and then arrested.
Arrested and dead.
The men who lasted were
Yeah, you got arrested in eternal hell.
the men who did last were usually the ones who understood how to stay productive while remaining in the background. And that description fit Benny perfectly. As his influence grew, he became increasingly trusted within the Colombo hierarchy. He developed relationships with other members of the family's leadership, became involved in larger ops than the street-level gambling and collection work that had defined his early years. Oh, what's he going to do now? Like getting in with the construction shit? The exact details of every promotion during his period aren't always clear, which is common when dealing with organized crime. Mafia families rarely publish organizational charts.
Hey, it's a weekly Mafia newsletter. We bumped up Benny to Capo, and unfortunately,
Your weekly local mob.
Paulie, you know, he's sleeping with the fishes. So
I want you guys to say a prayer for Vincenzo. He's feeling a little down lately. And watch out for Tony. He's going crazy again. Give him about a week. He'll be all right.
he's back on that sauce.
Why don't you check out the Mamma Mia's new pastrami sandwich? It's fucking A-OK.
Hey, okay. Gabagoo.
And then the headlines, and bring your guma to...
It's Guma.
It's guma night at...
It's Guma Thursday down at the Coca Cabana.
Happy hours half off, baby. Mafia families rarely publish organizational charts, or never.
Right.
And leadership positions often change quietly behind closed doors. What is clear is that Benny's standing inside the family was steadily improving. By the time the 70s were coming to a close, he was no longer viewed as simply the son of Sebastian Buster Aloi or the brother of Vincenzo Aloi. He had established his own reputation on Benedetto Aloi. He's the kid that grown up around the Profaci family, and he was becoming one of the Colombo's family's most trusted earners and rising leaders. He's a rising star. And before long, the old federal government, they would begin paying much closer attention to him. Like, oh, okay.
For years, Benny had managed to build his reputation inside the family while staying largely out of the public spotlight. That all began to change in the mid-70s. By this point, federal and local investigators were putting increasing pressure on New York's organized crime families. The cops, law agencies had become more aggressive. Grand juries were digging deeper into corruption cases. Prosecutors were looking for ways to attack entire criminal organizations instead of just arresting one bookmaker or one loan shark, some little guy at the bottom.
Right.
One investigation focused on illegal gambling operations and allegations that certain police officers were helping protect those rackets.
You know that was.
As some investigators dug in the case, they began calling suspected mob figures before a grand jury.
There we go.
That goal was simple. get them under oath, and see if their testimony matched the evidence. November 19th, 1974, Benny, he found himself among that massive group of alleged organized figures who were indicted on perjury charges in Brooklyn. He's part of more than 150 of those mobsters that were swept up in the case.
Damn.
Prosecutors accused him of lying to a grand jury that was investigating police collusion with an illegal gambling operation.
All right. They got proof of this?
The allegations centered on what the witnesses had said under oath, rather than charging everyone with running the gambling business. Authorities claim that many of them had just deliberately provided false testimony during the investigation, which is, you still got a few years. For organized crime figures, grand jury appearances were always dangerous. A person who answered honestly could potentially expose criminal activity, obviously.
Right.
A person who refused to answer could face legal consequences. And a person who lied, they risked perjury. Investigators understood that dilemma and often used it as a way to pressure suspects.
Right.
For Benny, the indictment represented one of the first times his name appeared prominently in connection with a major criminal investigation. It's also a sign of how much attention law enforcement was beginning to pay the Colombo family as a whole, and the other mafia family organizations in New York. The old days when old mob figures could operate almost entirely in the shadows were gone.
Yeah.
Federal agencies were collecting intelligence, building informant networks. That's the big one. And sharing information in ways they hadn't done a generation earlier. Prosecutors were becoming more ambitious. Organized crime figures were finding themselves dragged into courtrooms with increasing frequency.
Uh-oh.
Despite the publicity surrounding the indictment, the case did not end Benny's career.
Oh, never does.
Like many mafia figures of the era, he managed to survive the legal challenge and he continued operating.
Nice.
But the investigation served as an early warning. Now, the popos, they know who you are, buddy. And they know where he operated. That's the most important part.
A little bit more discreet, bud. Over the next 2 decades, investigators would keep finding Benny's name appearing in larger and larger cases. And by the late 70s, early 80s, Benny had become exactly the kind of mobster every crime family wanted. He wasn't a celebrity gangster. He wasn't constantly making headlines. He wasn't attracting attention with public feuds or flashy behavior. Instead, he's just doing one thing. He was making money. In organized crime, that's all that mattered. While movies often focus on murders, robberies, and dramatic shootouts, the reality is that the mafia and their leaders, they spent far more time thinking about revenue than violence. Violence is just a tool. Money is the goal. The rackets that Benny was involved in reflected that reality. One of his primary businesses remained gambling. The illegal numbers game had been a cornerstone of organized crime for decades. Every day, people placed bets on the combinations of numbers, hoping that they'd win. To the average bettor, it felt similar to a lottery ticket. To the mafia, it was a reliable cash machine. Thousands of small wagers added up quickly. Collectors gathered the bets. Bookmakers tracked the action. Supervisors took the percentage, and money flowed upward through the organization. This is unlike a robbery, which might produce a large score once, but gambling produced income every single day. The same was true of loan sharking. For people who couldn't qualify for traditional bank loans, mob-connected lenders were often willing to provide cash. The problem was interest. The interest was sky high, baby.
Why is that illegal?
Right.
To borrow people money. I mean, obviously, the way they're getting it, like the payments if they miss a payment and shit.
Well, and the interest, too. I don't think you can charge that much interest.
Of course, why not?
Right. Payments could become overwhelming in a hurry, especially when borrowers fell behind. And once someone was trapped in debt, the lender often gained leverage over them. There goes your business or your legs, one of the two. Some borrowers paid the money back. Others ended up surrendering businesses, property, or control over parts of their lives.
Yeah.
Wow. For organized crime families, loan sharking created both income and influence. And by this stage of his career, old Benny, he wasn't just participating in these rackets. He was helping oversee them. He was the boss.
He was a big dog.
His job wasn't necessarily to collect every debt personally or even handle every gambling operation himself. As members moved higher within the family, their responsibilities changed. They supervised people. They had their own little crew. They went out and did that. They settled disputes. They made sure that money reached the right places. The system depended on trusted administrators. You got to have those administrators you can trust. And this is where Benny's reputation became valuable. Inside that very Colombo family, he was viewed as a dependable earner and a reliable manager. He understood the business side of organized crime and knew how to keep profitable operations running. And those skills became even more important as law enforcement pressure increased there in the 80s. Yeah, because we all know what happened in the 80s.
Investigators were no longer focusing only on individual crimes. They were beginning to examine entire criminal enterprises. Gambling operations, loan sharking, labor rackets, construction schemes. They were all drawing greater scrutiny from the federal authorities. Benny found himself facing yet another major legal challenge June 28, 1984. Prosecutors indicted him on loan sharking charges connected to a company known as Resource Capital Group in Lake Success, New York. Authorities, they allege that the company had lent more than $1 million over roughly 18 months, while charging interest rates of 2% or more per week. Holy shit.
Wow.
Those numbers may not sound shocking at first. Yes, they do. Yeah. But over time, rates like that could bury borrowers under crushing debt. That's 10% a month.
That's ridiculous.
The case represented another attempt by prosecutors to attack the financial side of the organized crime rather than focusing solely on the traditional street crimes. Yet, once again, Benny, he managed to survive. The investigation created some problems, but it didn't remove him from the family.
No.
And if anything, the years that followed would see him move even closer to the organization's leadership, and it would. While federal agents were building cases, Benny, he was still continuing to build influence, which is more important. Before long, he would find himself involved in one of the most and some of the most important power struggles the Colombo family had faced in decades. So you know what's coming.
Yes.
By the late 80s, Benny was no longer just another Colombo family earner. After decades in the crime family and organized crime in general, he had established himself as a trusted and experienced figure within the family's leadership circle. See, he'd survived some investigations, he avoided major convictions, and he continued producing money, more importantly, through the kinds of rackets that kept the mafia running.
Damn right.
That combo earned him some respect. Inside organized crime, promotions weren't handed out because of age or seniority alone. A man had to demonstrate that he could make money, handle pressure, and remain loyal when things got difficult. Benny, he'd been doing all three for years. As his influence grew, he rose to the rank of captain or capo, placing him in charge of his own crew. That role, it required some trust. A weak captain could create problems throughout an entire organization. Right. A strong one, he could become one of the family's most valuable assets. By this time, the Colombo family was being led by Carmine Persico. Persico had survived internal wars, government investigations, and countless attempts to remove him from power. Even after his conviction during the Mafia Commission case, he got a hundo. The mid-'80s sent him to federal prison. He remained the official boss of the family while locked up.
He did.
See, that recreated a unique situation. See, he's behind bars. The family's still operating on the street. Someone had to manage the day-to-days. As a result, trusted leaders were given greater authority to keep the organization functioning while Persico continued issuing directives from prison. During this period, Benny's standing continued to improve. Sources differ on the exact timing of some of his promotions, but what is clear is that by the end of the decade, he had become part of the upper levels of the Colombo family hierarchy, and he was viewed as a trusted figure by powerful members of the family. He wasn't known as a charismatic public face like Colombo had been. He wasn't known for dramatic violence or headline-grabbing crimes. His strength was something much simpler. He knew how to run some businesses. He understood gambling. He understood loan sharking. And he understood how much money flowed through organized crime. Perhaps most importantly out of all those, he understood the internal politics of the family.
Hey.
And those political skills would soon become critical, literally life and death.
All right. Well, that's because beneath the surface, tensions were beginning to build. Carmine Persico was still calling himself the boss from prison. Meanwhile, the man running the family on the street, Victor Orena, he was gaining influence and developing ideas of his own, and he was trying to put up a little scheme of his own. At first, the arrangement appeared workable, but before long, his struggle for control would divide the Colombo family once again into rival camps and trigger one of the bloodiest internal mafia wars in modern history. And Benny, he would find himself right in the middle. For years, the arrangement inside the Colombo family appeared to be working. Carmine, he remained the official boss. Victor Orena handled the family's day-to-day. The system wasn't perfect, but allowed for organization to continue functioning while Carmine served a lengthy prison sentence.
Yeah, literally life.
Right. The problem was that prison sentences last a long time. In this case, forever. And the longer that Carmine remained behind bars, the more power Orena was accumulating.
Yep.
And by the late 80s, early 90s, Orena wasn't just simply carrying out orders anymore. He was running one of New York's 5 families. He was making decisions, settling disputes, supervising captains, overseeing the family's rackets. And this is all from the power of Carmine. He said, hey, bud.
He said, you can even order some murders, but don't even ask me.
Every day that passed strengthened his position. And many members began asking an obvious question. Wait, if Orena was doing the job, why wasn't he the boss? And from Orena's perspective, the answer may have seemed simple. Carmine had been incarcerated for years and would remain locked up for years to come.
Why didn't Orena just be like,
right,
whatever, dude, we'll keep this. Yeah, we got to kick a little bit back up to Persico.
Right.
Like
Right.
Whatever, I'm still making millions.
Right. Running a crime family from prison was possible, but it created constant challenges. Messages had to be passed through intermediaries. Decisions that could take time. Communication wasn't always reliable. Yeah, but Orena had all the power to do all that.
Right.
Some members believed the family would be better off with leadership on the street rather than behind bars. Others, they said, are you fucking kidding me?
This is Carmine. Come on.
Come on. To Persico loyalist, Carmine, still the boss, regardless of where he is. The fact that he was in prison didn't change anything. We took an oath to him, not you, Orena. As opinions hardened, the family began splitting into camps. On one side stood Carmine and those who remained loyal to him. On the other, it was Orena and the growing number of members who believed the acting boss should become the permanent boss. Or maybe one of those guys should become boss. We don't know.
Right.
And Benny, he found himself in the middle. And he's like, oh, shit. And by this point, he spent decades building relationships throughout the family on both sides. He knew the key players on both sides. He understood the organization's internal politics. And because of his standing within hierarchy, his support carried weight. As tensions increased, Benny, he aligned himself with Orena.
Oh.
And he wasn't alone. His brother Vince also became associated with the Orena faction. And the Alois were now tied to one side of what was becoming a full-scale power struggle. At first, both sides tried to avoid open warfare. There were meetings, there were attempts to negotiation, and there were also efforts to find some kind of compromise that would prevent the family from tearing itself apart for a second fucking time after the FBI just came in and tore apart pretty much all the 5 families.
Third time.
Wait, this is the third one?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. But this is where organized
went to prison after the
yeah.
first war and then got out and resumed the war, basically.
Right. But this is where organized crime has a long history of leadership disputes ending badly. And the Colombo family knew that better than most. From Orena's perspective, support for men like the Aloi brothers, that's crazy. He'll take it. And it was very critical to have as well. If he was going to challenge Persico's authority, he needed experienced captains and administrators behind him. He needed people who could bring crews, connections, and earning power with them. And Benny, he offered all of those. Sources differ on some of the exact titles held during this period, but several accounts place Benny among Orena's top supporters and describe him as holding a senior leadership role within faction. Whether he was viewed as an underboss, acting underboss, or another high-ranking administrator, there's little doubt that he had become one of the most important figures on Orena's side. As the conflict intensified, meetings became more secretive. Trust was pretty much gone. Members stopped assuming they were safe around people that they had known for years.
Well, even if you weren't in a family fight, you shouldn't be assuming you're safe around these guys anyway.
Yeah, men began carrying guns, not because you tell me they never carried guns before?
Right.
Men were carrying guns everywhere, not because they feared rival crime families. No, they were fearing the same people in their own vehicles. Rumors spread constantly. One day, somebody was supposedly switching sides. The next day, reports that a hit team was being assembled. Then there came stories that certain captains had already been marked for death. Well, whether every rumor is true or not, it doesn't matter. People believed they could be murdered. And belief changed everything. Federal investigators watching the family later described an atmosphere of extreme paranoia. They're like, we'll just let these motherfuckers take them out. Each other, safely. The Colombo family was becoming consumed by suspicion. And the closer someone was to Orena or Persico, the bigger the target on their back became. Oh, Benny, he was now firmly in the center of the storm. His years of climbing the ranks had brought him influence and power. But power came with visibility, and visibility came with danger, and danger became with everything else. The higher a man stood within either faction, the more valuable he became as a target. 1991, it moved along. The argument over leadership stopped being a political dispute, stopped being a disagreement over who should run the family, and it became a fight for survival. And before long, the Colombo family would erupt into open warfare once again.
By the end of 91, the Colombo family had crossed a line that would be almost impossible to come back from. The dispute between Persico and Orena was no longer about meetings, negotiations, or behind-the-scenes maneuvering. People were getting shot. What became known as the Third Colombo War turned one of New York's 5 families into a battlefield. Mm-hmm. Unlike the traditional mafia conflict between rival organizations, this was a civil war. Men who had once attended weddings together, shared meals together, worked together, were now hunting each other together. Right. Nobody knew who would be next. Right. Members on both sides began traveling with armed escorts. Meetings were conducted cautiously. Cars were checked for signs of surveillance. People changed routines and avoided predictable schedules. Fear wasn't paranoia, but it was.
All right.
It was survival. Throughout New York, shootings connected to the conflict began making headlines. Members of both factions were attacked as each side attempted to weaken the others. The goal wasn't necessarily to wipe out the entire opposing faction. It was just remove enough key figures that the other side would collapse and they have no choice but to surrender. For Benny, this was the most dangerous period of his life. As one of Orena's most important supporters, he became a valuable target for Persico loyalists. Federal court records and later accounts of the war indicate that members of the Persico faction targeted senior Orena supporters in an effort to cripple the rival leadership structure. Well, yeah. Benny's name surfaced among those viewed as important figures inside his camp. At the same time, though, Orena's faction was trying to defend itself while maintaining control of its own operations, which wasn't easy. They still had gambling businesses running, loans still had to be collected, money still had to move, and crews still expected some sort of leadership around.
Right.
All that had to continue while members worried about being ambushed every time they left home to go collect those loans. The war also brought enormous attention from law. For years, the FBI had struggled to penetrate parts of organized crime. And now they're watching mafia members shoot at one another in public.
Oh.
Every arrest generated new information. Every search warrant uncovered new evidence. Every cooperator created fresh problems.
Damn right.
The family was damaged itself in ways federal prosecutors could have never accomplished on their own. And as the violence continued, Orena's position became increasingly difficult.
Starting as an attempt to gain permanent control of the family was turned into disaster. The conflict costing lives, generating arrests, drawing unprecedented scrutiny from investigators. Then, the government struck. 1992, Victor Orena was arrested and eventually convicted. All for naught. He would, right, well, somebody in prison shouldn't be the leader, but I bet he's going to want to still be the leader.
Right.
He would receive multiple life sentences, effectively ending his bid.
You think they did that because
to take control of the Colombo family?
Basically, the FBI probably was like, we'd rather have Persico in charge instead of this fucking hothead guy.
Oh no, was this leave old Benny? Without Orena on the street, his faction began to weaken. Some supporters were in prison, others switched allegiances once again. Some simply tried to stay alive and avoid becoming the next casualty. But for Benny, the collapse of Orena's challenge created a new reality. The side that he had backed, it was losing. The war that had promised a new leadership structure instead left the Colombo family battered, divided, and under intense federal pressure. And while the shooting war was beginning to wind down, Benny had another problem. For years, federal investigators had been quietly building a massive case involving corruption, extortion, and construction contracts in New York City. And soon that investigation would place Benny Aloi in great, great danger. More danger than the old Colombo War would ever have done to him. Well, this is because unlike the family conflict, this threat wasn't coming from rival mobsters. It was coming from the feds. While the Colombo War was grabbing headlines and tearing the family apart, federal investigators were working on something even bigger. And for years, the FBI and federal prosecutors had been digging. They've been digging right into one of the most profitable mafia schemes in New York. Not drugs, not bank robberies, not hijacked trucks. It involved Windows 95, EXP, right? EXP, XP. On the surface, it sounded almost boring. Windows? In reality, it was one of the largest organized crime construction rackets uncovered in New York during that era. Wow. That scheme centered on contracts awarded by the New York City Housing Authority, commonly known as the NYCHA.
NYCHA.
Throughout the late 70s and 80s, massive numbers of windows were being replaced in public housing projects all across the city. The work involved millions of dollars and thousands of buildings. I mean, how do you not get involved in that?
All right.
Where there's that much money floating around, the mafia, they seen their opportunity, as in everything else. According to federal investigators, members of multiple New York crime families quietly took control of a huge portion of the business. The operation, it wasn't limited to the Colombos. Figures from the Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, and the Colombo families were all linked to the various parts of the scheme. Rather than competing against each other, they cooperated with each other, right? That's how you make money. The arrangement's simple. Contractors expected to play by the mafia's rules. Companies that wanted to work often had to use approved installers, approved labor arrangements, approved bidding practices. If they didn't cooperate, they could find themselves facing labor problems, business disruptions, or other obstacles that made it difficult to operate.
Yeah, like not having any legs.
Right.
Kneecaps.
Federal prosecutors later alleged that the mob controlled interests, effectively manipulated bidding and controlled access to large portions of the window replacement market. Well, I'm sure.
One company that became central to the investigation was Graham Architectural Products. According to court records, Graham attempted to compete more independently than some of the other companies involved in the industry. Prosecutors argued that pressure was applied to discourage those efforts and keep the company's actions in line with the interests of the racketeering scheme. Investigators, they believe the conspiracy had been operating for years. By the time they finished tracing contracts, labor arrangements, and business relationships, they concluded that enormous amounts of money had flowed through that operation. And for old Benny, the case represented something different from the gambling and loan shark investigations earlier in his career. This wasn't a local gambling probe. This wasn't a perjury indictment. This was a major federal racketeering investigation targeting the business side of organized crime.
Right, it was a public-funded project, too.
And Benny, he wasn't being viewed as some low-level participant either. Prosecutors identified him as one of the senior Colombo figures connected to the scheme. By this point, Benny had spent decades climbing through the ranks of organized crime. He survived leadership changes, investigations, and Colombo Wars. Now, the old feds, they're preparing to argue that he helped oversee part of a multi-million-dollar extortion operation involving some of the most powerful mafia figures in the New York City.
New York City?
The government, they spent years building that case. They had a bunch of informants talking. Conversations are all recorded, and all the evidence is collected. And before long, old Benny and several other high-ranking mob figures would find themselves facing one of the biggest organized crime prosecutions of the era. By the time the Windows case was ready to move forward, federal investigators had spent years quietly putting the pieces together. Government, they weren't trying to prove a single robbery or a single act of extortion. They were trying to show that organized crime had spent years manipulating one entire industry. To do that, they needed some witnesses, they needed some recordings, and most importantly, they needed people on the inside. One of the government's most valuable sources became Peter Savino. He's a former organized crime associate who agreed to cooperate. He wasn't just talking either, he was recording. Well, for roughly 18 months during the late 80s, he secretly recorded conversations involving figures connected to the scheme and gave those recordings to the prosecutors, and they had something they often struggled to obtain in regular cases. Got some evidence coming directly from the participants.
Right.
And those tapes became a major part of the investigation, as you would imagine. I mean, you got them all on tape, just like they got Gotti. They got.
Getting got good. At that very same time, investigators are interviewing business executives, contractors, labor officials, and others connected to the industry. One of the most important witnesses, Russell Trout, president of Graham Architectural Products. Trout, he described the pressure his company was faced when it attempted to operate outside the system prosecutors said that Mafia had created. According to the court records, companies that didn't cooperate, they could find themselves facing serious business problems, making it difficult to even compete for contracts anywhere else. The government also gained testimony from Peter Chiodo, former Lucchese family captain, who had become a cooperating witness. Chiodo, he was no small-time criminal. No. He had once been a powerful mafia figure himself. Now, he's helping explain how organized crime families, how they work together behind the scenes, and their influence over union and contractors could be used to control entire industries. That's all it is. Investigators compared witness testimony, recordings, business records, surveillance reports that began building a much larger picture. This wasn't simply a Colombo operation. It was a cooperative effort involving all the members of the New York crime families. And for prosecutors, that made the case even more significant. Payday, baby. For defendants, it made the case far more dangerous. The more evidence investigators collected, the harder it became to dismiss the allegations as misunderstandings or unreliable accusations. By 1990, federal authorities, they believed that they had enough evidence to move on with the case. May 30th, 1990, Benny Aloi, several other high-ranking organized crime figures, indicted as part of what became known as the Windows case.
As you would expect, that indictment was massive. Federal prosecutors accused the defendants of participating in that long-running scheme. For Benny, this was unlike any legal challenge. He had the 1974 perjury case. It was gone. 84 loan sharking investigation. Got away. But this time it's different. The feds, they had spent years gathering evidence, cooperating witnesses, recordings, financial records. They're preparing to put everything in front of a jury. For decades, Benny also managed to stay one step ahead of the prosecutors, but now for the first time, it looks like the government might finally have enough to bring them all down and go in the slammer along with your old boss.
Yep.
The trial began in 91 and involved multiple defendants connected to several of the families. Prosecutors argued that the defendants had used extortion, intimidation, labor influence, and organized crime connections to control a large portion of the window replacement industry. The government presented testimony from cooperating witnesses, business executives, and former organized crime figures. Jurors also heard evidence gathered during years of investigation, including secretly recorded conversations and testimony describing how contractors and manufacturers were pressured to follow the rules of the scheme. For the defense, strategy was pretty straightforward. Attack the credibility of the government's witnesses. You got a bunch of criminals testifying against us. Like, wasn't an unusual approach, obviously. Cooperating witnesses often had criminal histories of their own, and they frequently received benefits for their testimony. Defense attorneys argued that such witnesses had strong incentives to tell prosecutors exactly what they wanted to hear.
Right.
But the feds, they believe the witnesses were supported by recordings, documents, and other evidence gathered during the investigation. Right, you can't say, well, he's a junkie, he was stealing stuff too. Like, sir, we have your client on tape saying, fuck these fucking windows. Right. Get all the money. Right. That's not him.
Right. Trial continued. Jurors were asked to sort through a mountain of testimony and determine who they believed. For Benny, the stakes couldn't have been much higher. A conviction would almost certainly mean spending the rest of his life behind bars. An acquittal would allow him to walk away from the biggest case prosecutors had ever built against him. After months of proceedings, the jury finally reached its verdict in October of 1991. The results mixed. Aloi, several co-defendants were acquitted on some of the government's broader racketeering allegations. Prosecutors had hoped to secure sweeping convictions that would tie the defendants to a larger criminal enterprise. The jury wasn't convinced on every count, no. But the government still won where it mattered. Benny Aloi was found guilty of conspiracy to commit extortion, and extortion connected to the effort to control parts of the window replacement industry. For federal prosecutors, it was a major victory. Benny, it was the beginning of the end. The conviction itself was devastating, but the sentencing that followed proved even worse. Because on the March 26, 1993, United States District Judge Raymond Deary sentenced Benny Aloi to 16 years and 8 months in federal prison and imposed a $100,000 fine. Massive sentence it was. The judge viewed the crimes as part of a large-scale organized crime operation that had corrupted a major public contracting system and generated significant illegal profits over many years. Yeah, because the IRS didn't get their shit.
Right.
Aloi, of course, he appealed, though Benny did.
He appealed. Like many convicted mob figures, he argued that errors had occurred during the trial and sentencing. His attorneys challenged various aspects of the government's case and sought to overturn the conviction, which it failed. Federal appeals courts upheld both the conviction and the sentence. After decades of avoiding a career-ending conviction, Benny Aloi had finally run out of escapes. The man who had spent most of his life rising through the family hierarchy was now headed to federal prison. Unlike in previous investigations, though, there would be no quick return to business. Nearly 60, Benny, he was beginning a prison sentence that would consume the remainder of his prime years. Oh, he's kind of out of his prime already, guys.
Right.
When he entered federal prison in 93, an entire chapter of his life comes to an end.
Yep. No more fancy cars, diamond rings.
For more than 3 decades, he had lived as a member of organized crime, risen from the son of a Colombo-connected mobster to a senior figure within one of the 5 families. He survived some investigations, some internal power struggles, and even the Colombo Civil War. Now there was very little he could control. The federal prison system is designed to take control away from inmates. Schedules are determined by the institution, movement is restricted, communication monitored. Decisions that once belonged to the prisoner are made by somebody else. When you ain't gonna shit until I tell you to shit. For a man who had spent years exercising authority, it was a dramatic change for old Benny. Public records reveal little about Aloi's day-to-day prison experience, which isn't unusual. Unlike some mobsters who became government witnesses, generated headlines, or continued to attract attention behind bars, Benny, he just disappeared from public view after his conviction. He was just walking in the yard.
He got put in a fucking...
Right. What is known that he continued fighting his case through the courts, and he appealed both of his conviction and his sentence. His legal team argued the mistakes were made. The appeals court disagreed time and time again.
Right.
94, the Second Circuit Court upheld both the conviction and the sentence. As the years passed, the world outside changed dramatically.
Yes, it did.
The mafia that Benny had joined as a young man was not the same mafia that existed by the late 90s and into the early aughts. Federal racketeering laws had crippled many traditional operations. Informants, you probably got more informants than you got mafia members at this point.
Right.
High-ranking bosses across New York had been convicted. Construction rackets, labor rackets, gambling operations, extortion schemes that had once dominated and generated enormous profits, they're now facing constant pressure from law. Even the Colombo family itself was no longer what it had been during Benny's rise. The damage caused by the war, combined with the years of prosecutions, had weakened the organization considerably. Many of the men Benny worked with are dead. Others, they're in prison. Some are witnesses. The old world was slowly disappearing.
Sure fuck was. By the time old Benny neared the end of his sentence, he was no longer the rising mob leader of the 80s or the faction leader of the 90s. He was an aging inmate approaching release after spending more than a decade and a half behind bars. Finally, March 2009, Benny Aloi released from a halfway house in New York after serving his sentence. The release marked the end of one of the longest chapters of his life. But unlike many points earlier made in this story, there was no dramatic comeback waiting for him. No reports of him reclaiming a major leadership position. No new criminal cases that put him back in the spotlight. After decades spent inside one of America's most powerful crime organizations, Benny Aloi largely faded from public view. And for the very first time since his youth, he was no longer climbing the Colombo family ladder. His mob career over. Only 2 years after regaining his freedom, the final chapter of his story would arrive. Many organized crime figures spend their final years dealing with new indictments, parole violations, government scrutiny, or ongoing power struggles within their own families that they came back to. Others, they attempted to remain active in mob affairs for as long as possible. There is little evidence that Benny did either. After serving more than 16 years in prison, he returned to the New York area. He quietly resumed a civilian life. The days of the faction wars, federal trials, and multi-million-dollar rackets behind him, at least publicly. April 7th, 2011, Benedetto Aloi dies of natural causes at the age of 75. His death brought an end to a life that had been connected to organized crime for nearly as long as anyone can remember. From the moment he was born, the old mob had been part of his world. His daddy, his brother, his cousins, his best friends all belonged to the Profaci family. His brother became one of the most influential figures. Benny himself, he spent decades climbing through the ranks. In many ways, his story reflects the path followed by countless traditional mafia members of his generation. He wasn't known as a notorious hitman. He wasn't flashy celebrity gangster. He didn't become a household name like John Gotti or Al Capone. Instead, he represented something far more common inside organized crime. He was a businessman of the underworld. Most of his career revolved around making money through gambling, loan sharking, labor influence, and construction-related rackets. The violence that surrounded his life was often tied to larger struggles for power, rather than personal notoriety. That really is one of the reasons why that Benny Aloi remains a relatively obscure figure compared to some other mobsters. His career placed him at the center of several important chapters of Mafia. He witnessed the transformation of Profaci into the Colombos. He rose during the era of Carmine Persico. He sided with Victor Orena during the bloody Colombo War. And he became one of the most prominent Colombo figures convicted in the massive Windows case. Take all that together. Those events provide a unique window into the changing face of organized crime in New York.
Well, when old Benny entered the mafia world, many traditional rackets operated openly in neighborhoods across the city. But by the time he left prison, federal prosecutors, racketeering laws, surveillance technology, and cooperating witnesses had dramatically changed the landscape. The mafia, they still existed, but in no way, shape, or form it was the same world Benny had grown up in. In the end, his legacy isn't really about one spectacular crime or one infamous murder. It's the story of a man born into the crime and who spent his entire adult life inside of it. He learned the business from his father. He rose through the ranks alongside his brother. He survived decades of investigations, internal turmoil.
Yeah.
And eventually, like many powerful mob figures of his generation, he was brought down not by a rival gangster, but by a federal courtroom. For Benny Aloi, the mafia wasn't a chapter in his life. It was his life. Benny Aloi. Hey, did you guys know that he was involved in racketeering and fucking
oh my God,
all sorts of shit?
You know, he wasn't a flashy gangster.
He grew up inside the mob with his brother.
Fucking Pete. Holy shit.
Oh, man. That's going to do it for us. Outlaws, Gunslingers, what about the Michiganders?
Bye.